Love this. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. My name is Ianthe. I am the host and also the founder of the Onyx Archive, which is an institution blog where what we do is I challenge bold perspectives on culture, identity, and transformation, challenging norms and inspiring change. So, this series that my lovely co hosts and I are doing is called the Americanization Series. Last week, it was all about assimilation. We've all been erased. This week, our topic is all about spiritual enslavement. Ooh, ooh. And we're going to get all up into that. But before we do, I'm going to let my co host introduce herself.
Thank you, Ianthe, and hello, viewers. My name is Alexandria, Alex for short, and I'm visiting from my channel, Alex the Academic. That is a channel dedicated to the exploration of knowledge, critical discourse, and deep analysis. I engage in intellectual and philosophical discussions there, offer thoughtful social commentary, and examine the depths of film and literature. The goal of that channel is to challenge ideas, expand your perspectives, and cultivate a deeper understanding of the world because knowledge is power. And we've come
We've come
together
together
to shatter the illusions we've been sold.
to make you question the narratives we've been told. And
And to fuck shit up.
because bad bitches know what's up.
Yes, we do.
Love that. Love that. That's a little intro we've been trying, y'all. So y'all let us know how y'all feel about it. We know you loved it, but anyway.
Let us know how much you loved it.
Right. We're ironing out the kinks, but we worked very hard on it. Okay. So for our discussion, we love to like just roll right into things. And so, like we said, we're talking about spiritual enslavement. So since mostly our country has been built on Christianity, even though, it was our founders were fleeing religiosity, they brought it here and made the foundation this Judo Christian thing, pillar. And so we kind of wanted to jump right in and talk about Christianity, its its defining moments, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and what that has meant to us in our own personal journeys and our own personal narratives, and how we have maybe either felt enslaved by it and how we've maybe broken away and found our own voices within a religious structure and hierarchy. So for me, let's see, I was introduced to Christianity through my mom, the Black Church, Bible Belt. I'm from Houston, Texas. You're from Houston, Texas.
Same. Yes.
So like we know the the Christianity is just like the basis of growing up in the South. Like that's what you know, that's what you're fed and all of those things. And so I think my introduction with Christianity, I feel like it was interesting because it was kind of like it was very structured. I remember it being very structured, very organized, like the church being a big part of our lives, going to choir rehearsal, going to Bible study, all of my best friends were from church. Like it was just like I guess a first family, I would say, not necessarily a second family, but it was like the foundation of community for me. And I think how my mother introduced me to Christianity, it was very like, yeah, this is what I believe in, and this is what I do, and this is how I'm going to structure our life. And I was like, all right, girl, cool, all right. Because for a while, I remember saying, like, I feel like God is my mom's God. I didn't think he was my God or whatever, because I felt like he
Wow.
would. Yeah, because I remember saying that at a young age, because I felt like she would maybe pray about things or ask for things, and to me, I would be like, oh wow, she's getting what she asked for, and I'm like, well, he doesn't seem to be responding to me, so that is your God. That God is for you, because obviously, I don't know, you have a relationship. I don't know what I'm doing out here, so but yeah, so that's kind of like where my journey with Christianity began, and you know, I don't know. How do you feel like, where did yours kind of start?
Very similar for me. I was raised, my parents divorced when I was young. So my mom was the single mom. She was the primary parent. And she's been Christian since before I was born. So I grew up similar to you. We spent every Sunday in church. When I was in like the first and second grade, we were very involved into the church we belonged. Like they started a private school. And she enrolled me and my younger brother. She was volunteering for the food pantry, Bible study every Wednesday, service every Sunday. And then my brother and
Mm,
I then were, like I said, we were there for school. So
mm,
it was very I'm very similar also with your experience of like struggling with faith, but a little bit different because when I was young, my mom's really firm belief and like passionate belief in God and Jesus and the church, I felt like I genuinely believed as a child, but
right.
I went through right. And so like I went through the painful experience of like actually believing her God was my God. But where I'm similar to you is what you said about, well, he doesn't seem to be answering. That really hit me
Mm,
in my soul, in my heart, because
wow. Yeah.
time we were at this church, she was involved with and eventually married to her second husband, who was
Mm,
abusive in all of the ways. Yeah, he was just a horrible person. I'll just leave it at that and not delve into it. But I remember very often being a little girl praying while they're fighting and screaming, or he left and she's in the bedroom
mm,
crying, and wondering
mm,
why God never answered my prayers, and like made him stop being mean or made him go away permanently and not come
mm.
back. So it was a crisis of faith for me at a very young age.
Wow.
And
Wow. Wow.
yeah, and even though my mom was eventually like betrayed by the pastors of that church, um, she still maintained her faith. She just lost faith in organized churches and
Got
the
you.
belief of like you said, finding a home and a
Yeah.
family. Yeah. So I think that's something a lot of people deal with. But that led into like my teenage years. Around 13, I started telling my mom like she wanted to find us a new church in the new area we lived in Tomball. You're familiar with Houston. So
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
there, and I'm in junior high, and she wanted to find me and my brother and her a new church to go to. And I was like, Mom, I don't want to do that. And I don't even think I believe in God and Jesus and being a Christian anymore. And it was something we ended up fighting about for years until I eventually like moved out of her house and moved in with my dad. It was one of those things where she wanted to make me, but she never actually did, but we still fought about it. Um,
Mm. That's interesting.
yeah, so those, yeah, and I think a lot of people have gone through that, being like having parents argue with them and fight with them about religion in general, and it seems like Christianity is a big one for that for some reason. But
Yeah.
I it just led me on this journey where then moving in with my dad, he is an atheist and he's very
Mm.
like candid. He'll talk to me about yeah, it's very interesting. And then my stepmom is agnostic. where
Okay.
she believes in
Interesting.
something, but she doesn't need to define it or contemplate. She definitely
Right.
doesn't pray or anything. She just, right. So it opened me up to like being able to just deal with being a teenager after leaving her house and then going into college. That was my time of, I had in the end of high school was saying like, oh, I'm an atheist too. I don't believe in anything. But that was very much trauma response from
Yeah.
genuinely believing. Yeah, like
Being upset, being
genuinely
angry.
believing.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But you can't be angry at a God you don't believe exists. So,
You have a
in
remarkable
college,
point
I finally, I mean, I think I've stolen that from somebody, like a movie or somewhere, but
I
it
like
stuck
that.
with me for a reason. Thank you. So I finally was real with myself going into college, like, okay, you do believe in something.
Right.
So it's obviously not what you were raised to believe by your mother, but let's explore. So I started reading books about um, I started with Islam, as
Okay.
interesting as that may sound, and that led me to Islamic Sufism, is what it's called, which
Interesting.
is, yeah, I hope I don't butcher the explanation, but it's the pillars of Islam, but they also believe in what we would consider like modern day spirituality and
Okay.
magic and
Okay.
manifesting. So they follow the pillars of Islam, and that led me down a rabbit hole of like there's also something called Christian mysticism, which is basically the
I've
same
heard about
idea.
that one.
And see, so that
Yeah.
opened my mind up to like, oh, this feels more true as I'm reading this. This is tugging on my heartstrings and I feel it in my soul. So that eventually
Mm,
led me to a book I still have to this day about Wicca. And I don't
okay.
identify myself as Wicca specifically because that was created in more modern times. But
Gotcha.
that led me to looking into paganism and just
Hmm.
generally like the witchy spiritual vibes. And in recent years, I've solidified that by looking into the Germanic paganism specifically. So
Interesting.
that's where I am now today. Yeah, I believe in a
Hmm.
source,
Yeah.
God, or um, but I believe that my guidance comes from my higher self.
Yeah.
I
I
believe,
feel that.
very similar to a lot of native cultures, the belief, it has a word, but I can't recall it right now, but that
Hmm.
everything has its own spirit or,
Okay.
energy
Yeah.
akin
Yeah.
to a human soul.
I
Yeah, it's
agree.
like, trees and crystals and herbs. That's why they help us in our manifesting and such, is because they have their own spirit.
No, I agree with you. I completely agree with that. I feel I loved that was a big bump.
That was, I'm so sorry. He's hooking up to a new trailer. You're good.
No, no,
Thank you for letting
no,
me know.
you're
He warned me though silently. He did a symbol. I was like, I know what that means. Let me grab my
it's
tripod.
like no, that's so funny. But I really like what you were talking about as far as like because this is a perfect like introduction into the basis of Christianity and in our personal journeys and how we have grown, how that was like a foundation that we like launched out of, because I too
Yeah,
had this similar journey of going into Christian mysticism, because
I love that.
it's very because there's a lot of things in Christianity, the foundations, the bare bones that I do believe in and that I do connect with, especially as I've gone on my own journey of deciding to focus on what does this mean for me? What do these words mean for me? What is the foundation for me? Not just what I'm being fed, but can I go and unpack it for myself? What do these words actually mean? And I think that as I went on my own spiritual journey, because I've always been deeply spiritual, and I feel like my deeply spiritualness is just, I feel like it's a divine gift that I believe God has given me to be so attuned to the spiritual realm, that I think that Christianity was just almost just like a launching point. It was just like here's somewhere to get you started so that you can realize that there's more than just you or your reality that you're experiencing. And I think Christianity was the start of that. But then I feel like as I grew and I started having more life experiences, I felt God being larger than Christianity altogether. I when I went to school in grad school in Monterey, California,
Wow.
because it was so detached from everywhere, like it was so um it was in nature and it was by itself. I felt like I encountered God in nature, in that calmness, in that stillness. And it wasn't four walls, it wasn't a church. It was very much outside of that because God became real to me in ways that were not this structured Christianity. God was like, I'm in the wind. I'm when you're by yourself and you get a new thought, a new idea. I'm that. I'm, all of these. I'm life itself. So I felt like I began to experience God in so many different ways, and I think Christianity was the basis of that. But I think we're supposed to kind of grow um, out of that to kind of experience God, especially our Western traditional Christianity, that it was like that. I feel like that's
That
supposed to be
part.
the beginning. I feel like that's supposed to be the beginning, but I don't think you're supposed to be trapped inside of that beginning, especially if you believe that God is omniscient and omnipresent and this huge force, then God has to exist in numerous other places other than just what or what we've been fed that what Christianity is. And I think that's the enslavement part because if God's literally in the Bible, it says, I came to give you life more abundantly, then it's more than you can ask or hope or think. So that means that it's more than that. So you shouldn't be
Yeah.
enslaved if God is like, I came to set the captives free. So yeah, I think.
Love it. I love the way that it was very vivid imagery of experiencing God in nature and realizing he's telling you, like, I'm in the wind, I'm in the trees, you know, there's this TikTok where a woman is poetically saying exactly that, like, oh, someone asked me yesterday, do I talk to God? And I said, oh, yeah, I talk to God. I know her well. I see her in the old lady down the street that hands out flowers to strangers and the flower growing out of a crack in the sidewalk. And for me, that was a um, um, very similar experience as well, getting into learning about paganism, starting with
Mm,
Wicca. That was another
mm,
stepstone up. And like you said, I love the imagery of launching pad, and reading that book is what really launched me into this is what fully resonates. God is everywhere. If God is within me, like Christianity, how I was raised says, like you said, you take that idea and you take it further. And you realize that
yeah,
he's not just within all of us, he's within every part of this world. I say she, he, but God is everywhere. And that power, like my belief in manifesting or personal magic, comes from that idea that everything holds the spirit of God, aka the spirit of creation. So
right,
like if I connect with that in any way, I can harness that for myself and make a huge impact. And I love, again, the way you connected it to the enslavement, spiritual enslavement, and that we are meant to go further. The way that you said,
right,
getting the feeling that God is just bigger than Christianity, I was like saying it perfectly. And I
yeah.
think
I
that's something that, I'm sorry, go ahead. I
no,
was rambling for so long.
no, you weren't. I just wanted to interject because, like what you said,
Yeah.
the idea that God is bigger than Christianity, and it's like, well, yeah, of course, because Christianity started with Judaism. It started there, and then it
Yep.
morphed it's like, okay, well, this is now we want to bring everyone into the fold, Jews and Gentiles, male and female. We want to bring everyone into the fold. So let's do Christianity now. So you can see the evolving even in religion itself. So in my mind, if every religion is saying, hey, we're experiencing God, we're experiencing God, we're experiencing God, I think that means that there's so many different expressions of God because God is so many expressions of God.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And that that perfectly, I have this point I love to make, and I feel like that leads perfectly into when you brought up all of these different religions that have their own experiences with God, and doing this um, religious journey in college, reading about all these different religions, kind of led me to the opinion that they all have a piece of the truth, and that the reality of it and the truth of creator, like if it's a Venn diagram of all the different religions, the truth
right,
of creator is where they all overlap, which is that God is love and the power of creation and life.
exactly. Exactly. And I believe that too. And that's why I think going into yeah, when we talk about almost like the because there's a point you said something um well, okay. Inequalities, hierarchy of how Christianity is placed up there at the top, and then how we
Hmm.
almost had to take it down from its place and almost put it on a shelf
Yes.
and then say, well, I'm going to go explore the other things.
Yes.
So how
Take
did
it down off of its pedestal that America puts it on.
that part? And so for you, I know that you'll get into your paganism and things like that, but where was that turning moment for you when you took it down and decided to explore a different route?
I think that would absolutely be realizing that my mom's Christian faith was more of a crutch and more of
Mm.
a spiritual enslavement, like is the topic of today. um, because going through as a child her second marriage and the abuse that we all suffered as a family due to her second husband, and then being betrayed by this church we dedicated ourselves to, that my brother and I went to school, and shortly after my mom like moved us from our childhood home, and then life just continued to fall apart, and I realized that my mom would cling to, like I see many other Christians, cling
Mm.
to her faith like a crutch.
Mm.
And I started seeing her after she moved us and then got sick. I started seeing more clearly, because it became worse and worse, how she would pray about things and pray for God to fix things, but then not step in and take any action for
Ooh.
herself.
Ooh.
And that is
Ooh.
why it's a personal thank you. I mean, that's why I said it feels perfectly in line with, like, I didn't have the words as a teenager, but just looking at my mom and realizing she sits and she cries and she prays, but
Ooh.
she could have left her second husband, she could have
Ooh.
protected me and my brother better,
Yeah.
like. And that's a key part of paganism and spiritualism, people that believe in personal magic or manifestation. You can't just, little candles and burn your paper,
Oof.
whatever you do to manifest, and not take
You
any action towards those things you want to manifest. Like, some
you are
Christians have this.
preaching.
Sorry, I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but I'm very
No, you
passionate
are.
about it, because
Talk
no
about it.
matter your religion, no matter what you call creator, they are not gonna do everything for you. You have to meet them halfway. Like, I think Christians have
I
the
love that.
saying, God, God works for those who work for themselves. You
Right.
know, it's like spirit will meet you halfway, but you have to get up and take action yourself.
Yeah.
Saying the prayers is showing that you have faith and asking for the guidance, but you don't stop there. You carry it with you as you take action. So seeing my
Yes.
mom, and it's just like I said, it's gotten worse, and to this day, you know, I haven't spoken to her in almost 3 years this May, but it's
Wow. Yeah.
I started seeing it clearly in my teenage, like, you know, high school age. And that's why, like, I didn't want to go to church starting at like 13 in junior high, because I saw, like, we leaned so heavily on that church we belonged to. I leaned on it heavily as a child. I believed in them. And then they let us down in our time of need, trying to get away from an abusive man. So
Mm.
that spiritual enslavement is something that a lot of people suffer from. And from my
Yeah.
point of view, a lot of Christians, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm just so passionate about this discussion.
Well, you know what? Thank you for sharing that because I think like all of this really does feed into the enslavement because especially what you said about there instead of there being an active belief in faith because faith is supposed to be an action word and an active word, there is a I think a part of this spiritual enslavement is a passivity that it is a
Wow. Yeah.
I'm gonna pray about it and I'm gonna let God do it. But you there there's this lady, well it's Solange used it on her album and it's called Do Nothing Without Intention and it comes from this YouTuber and she's like very of spiritualist and everything and she was saying do nothing without intention. So I think that in passive spirituality, in passive Christianity, in spiritual enslavement, there is a passivity that comes along with that, that does not have an intention to really do anything. Its intention is to pass it off onto God, onto the church, onto other things. And then people are sitting here waiting on their husband, waiting on their wife, waiting on that job promotion, waiting for their child to do A, B, C, X, Y, and Z. There becomes this the enslavement is the waiting for someone else to do the work instead of you doing the work. And I think that that's what happens in the enslavement part of it. That's literally what happens because then it creates a dependency on God that is not conducive to um overall spiritual growth, that is not conducive to your community, and your situation was not conducive to the very real like abuse that you were seeing and facing every day living in that household because there was no action taken by anybody. And you can really say that Christianity has become one of like speaking highly of taking action and things like that, but really it's a passivity that does not co-create with God.
Absolutely agreed. And you just sparked another point that I preachy with Christianity. I have no judgment for people who are Christian. Family members are still Christians that I talk just, but being honest of like our perspectives. But me, I don't align with those beliefs in any way anymore. It doesn't mean that I have contempt or judgment at all for anybody who's Christian. But bring it back to your point just now of the passivity, and it really has deep roots, or a deep hold, I should say, on the Christian community. The saying that people roll their eyes at all the time when Christians say, I'll pray for you. And that's the eye roll comes because of like, trying to be respectful, like, oh, well, they believe in this, they believe in their Christianity, and they're going to pray for people who are really suffering or needing help. It doesn't mean that much. The thought count when you just say, oh, I'll pray for you, and you don't do anything to reach out and help, especially for someone you care about. Contempt can come
Right.
from, because it's like, you're just gonna pray and watch me suffer and pray to your God in the sky, like,
And do
not my
nothing.
words, but exactly, and
Yeah,
do nothing. And that
I agree.
passivity comes where, like, well, you are here, you're in my life, you know what I'm going through.
Oof.
You could pray, but then also get up to help
Do.
me. And
Yes.
then, and as a person of faith who's saying, I'll pray for you, that is when God will be working through you and then meet
Exactly.
you halfway and make your work
Oof.
go that much further.
And this whole section, like, I'm glad we're talking about this because it's like it's beautiful because it's like setting the stage for like the entire discussion because it is the discussion, but I feel like it's setting the stage for people to understand that the spiritual enslavement, the depths of it, and not only its
Yes.
roots, but what it produces is this passivity. What it produces is this: I'm going to pray for you, but then do nothing for you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas these pagan religions, these Christian mysticisms, these other religions that are seen as bad, or all of these things that are not good, and they're demonic and they're not good for you. They're literally rooted in community, and their goal,
Mm-hmm.
they're action oriented. It's
Yes.
using
Rooted.
God. It's using, yeah, my knowledge of God, that we have God, we have someone who is a larger than us in all way, shapes, and form. But I'm also working with that energy to create in this life, in this reality. It's doing both. So
Amen. And I feel like, to add on to your point, it's working with that energy. It's when I started getting into and being honest with my mother when I still spoke to her, she eventually accepted it, but was one of the devil can hide to you and lie to you and like make you think something's okay. And I was just like, I have had this point and this I guess supportive thought to my belief system that I've believed in some kind of God since I was a child. I've always
right,
just had that feeling there's someone that created all of this, the evolutionary timeline, like, that is looking out for us
correct,
and guiding us. And if I believe that, and I believe I have a soul, and all of the different creatures and plants and parts of this world have their own soul as well, where is the evil in connecting with that for my personal magic? I
right,
very early in my discovery of all of this just hung on to. I used to have a chip on my shoulder about it, but just the Christian belief that it's some Christians, thou shalt not suffer a witch and things like that. And like you just said, that it's demonic, it's evil. And I'm just like, but how though? If I
yeah,
believe, if you as a Christian believe God created this world and created everything, He created this crystal,
yeah.
He created it. And if I believe it has power because He created it, where is the blasphemy? Where is the
I
evil?
agree. I agree
Like, adding on to, it connects you to community, to God, and to the world. And that's what you said
completely.
earlier about finding God in nature. That's the whole basis of pagan and many like
Yes.
native spirituality, recognizing that that's where we come from, is nature and God.
Yeah, and that's the basis. I feel like that's the basis for paganism. It's you
Yes.
connecting with God in very real, tangible ways instead of trying to connect with God in a traditional, like, it has to be like this, it has to be like that, and God's like, since
Hmm.
when? Like,
All these rules, exactly.
yeah, all these rules. Because I mean, quick little anecdote before we, continue. But I remember the other day I was having a conversation with my mom, probably like maybe like a week or two ago, and I was like, because I think she believes in like the separatism of God, like God's in some things, but God's not in other things, and there's like a
Gotcha.
separate form. Like sometimes I'm with God, other times I'm not, and I'm like, but I don't think you're ever separate from God. I said because the other day it was like very very cold, but the wind and the air was so crisp, and like when I was just breathing it in through my nostrils, it just felt so good to breathe that air and feel that crispness and feel that oxygen. And I said to her, I said, I could literally sit here and just, because I was walking in nature in the forest, and it's like snowing here, and I was like, I could just sit here and breathe all day. And I said, that's God right there. God's the reason why I'm able to be
Mm,
breathing right now. God created that wind that I can't see, that oxygen that I cannot see, to give me so I could breathe it in, so I could be alive right now. I said that's experiencing God. And that's something that we would pass by all the time and not even give it a second thought, because I've done that. But in that particular moment, I said, "Well, that's God." And when I told her that, she was like, "Oh, yeah." And I was like, "So you're never separate from God." And God even said, even in the Bible, it says you. It said even it says yea. I think it's Psalms. It says, "Yea, I will be with you even into the ends of the earth." So that means at no moment in
love
time
it.
are we ever not experiencing God. However you perceive it, at no moment, if you start looking for God, you'll find God. It says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." I, I can go on a whole random, Bible rant, but I'm like, God is like saying, "I'm here." So you're never so paganism and religiosity and Christianity and like all of these like isms, ologies that we throw out at each other is missing the point that like God is everywhere. It's like missing the point, and we're supposed to be engaging and interacting with God
Yes.
every way, shape, or form. So that way, like you said earlier, when someone is like, "Oh, I need this and I'm not doing this," you can jump in and be like, "Let me be God. Let me engage with this divinity right now." Because I can give you one more example. One of my coworkers, this beautiful Haitian woman. She's an amazing artist. Like, I mean, when I say realism, she's painting, drawing, like amazing. And so I've often seen like our where I work, they will collaborate with local artists, and they'll normally have art fairs like once or twice a month. And I remember passing by and seeing that. And I saw her one day and I said, "Hey, do you know we have an art show here that just happens, and the guests will come in and out and buy art. People's art is on display?" And she said, "No, I didn't know that." I said, "You need to put your art in there. You need to go up there and just have your art in there. Like, you
Yes.
need to be seen. People just need to see your work." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then the next day, I mean, a couple of weeks went by, and she was like, "Hey, my art is in the place." And I was like, "No way!" And she was like, "It's in there. It's in there. It's hung up." And I'm like, "Oh my God!"
Oh
But
my
in that
God.
moment, I was operating in my divinity to take action to open a door for someone to experience. I saw the divinity in her by what she was creating, and I said, "Oh, your divinity should let me respond to to your divinity with my divinity. Let me tell you to go do this, and maybe that'll open up more for you." So it's like that's an
And you
action.
inspired her to take action. Yes.
Yes. So I'm like, that's where those intersections of us being not only, the Bible says, don't only be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. So it's like, and that it's not a gatekeeping, it's not a hierarchy, it's not
Yeah.
a look at me, I'm a, Christian, and I have to do this and this and this. But it's like, if you really are seeking God and you're seeking to find God, you will find God in the smallest things, and you will interact with that divinity easily. It's very easy, and it takes
Absolutely.
nothing. So,
And I absolutely agree. And I to add on to the little point you just made about it's not supposed to be about, oh, look at me, I'm a Christian, I do this, this, and this, church on Sunday, 10% tithe, yada, yada, yada. But unfortunately, I feel like the current spiritual climate of America, especially Christianity, the Christian community, that's kind of what a lot of Christians, how they conduct themselves. It's that attitude
Right.
of, you are a good Christian if you do this, this, and this. It's like a checklist,
Right.
and don't think about these things too much, and um, being able to be loud and proud about your Christianity. But there's that inequality of, like, most Christians that conduct themselves that way will be loud and proud about their faith, but do not want to hear other people of other faith being loud and proud in the same way.
Yeah.
So that's another, yeah, that's another part
Yeah.
of the spiritual climate right now, is like this
Yeah.
inequality that is getting better. It's getting better, but same for the Christian community. I feel like more Christians are waking up to that, a little bit of, like, holier than thou, to say it that way, kind of
Right.
attitude,
Right.
and they're choosing to be different, which is beautiful. Um, but yeah, it just, like you said, it's not about the presentation, and it sparks, like, well, unfortunately, that's part of and that's part of the spiritual enslavement, right? Is
Yeah,
them
it is.
thinking so surface level about something that is
Surface.
so deep as spirituality.
So
Yeah.
deep. So deep.
Hmm.
God so deep. That's why I can't even say like God's. I think in some instances God is giving woman, sometimes God is giving man, sometimes God is just giving God. God, I just think God is all. Just everything.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I agree, but I usually think of God as woman because of that spirit of creation, and that
Mhm.
women truly are the source of, or the, what's the word? Like, the embodiment of that energy on this earth. Our ability to create, and not just create life with our bodies, but just women being able to make something incredible out of nothing, just in any example, any example.
Oh, yeah.
And what, yeah, and what opened my mind to that idea was the Wicca book that I mentioned. That, I might not be Wicca, but the story of the holidays and everything follow the line of Mother Goddess and Father God, but it all begins with Mother Goddess. And
Right.
it's a little weird. It's a little weird, a little Oedipusal, or however you say it, like Oedipus
Mhm.
vibes, but she gives birth to God, and he is the young God in the beginning of spring, and when spring is in full swing, he is matured, and then towards the fall is the, or sorry, towards the summer is the wedding of God and Goddess, so he, like, transforms from her son to a full god, or fully formed god. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for.
Okay.
And then transforms from her son to her husband, and the summer solstice celebration is the celebration of their marriage for Wicca. And then towards the end, God goes through another transformation of declining in the fall and choosing to die in the winter, and then the cycle begins
And
again
it
with
goes. Okay.
Yule. So sorry that
Interesting.
was a little tangent, but that's,
Interesting.
yeah. Thank you
Interesting.
for listening.
Interesting. Well, no, and I totally get that. I get the creation aspect of like seeing God as woman and like just yeah, I totally understand that. I would say I would add on to that, like from my perspective, I see God as more so all of the energies, all of the embodiments, everything that we are, God already is. So I think the
Yes.
ability to do action is masculine energy, to the doing part, while the feminine is the receiving or but I feel like they all play a role in the balance of just being a human being. And so I think in order for God to have created this balance of all of these energies, not just human energies, but the animals and crystals have energies. All I'm saying, like
Yes.
God itself has to be literally everything in order to have created everything. Flowers, microorganisms, nucleus, photosynthesis. God literally electricity. God literally has to be all of these things to create all of these things. Stars. So that's what I mean when I say like I feel like I can't
Yeah.
subscribe to God being like he, she, they, them because it's like okay, yes, and everything else.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree. I didn't. I might have done a poor job explaining, and then I went off on my tangent of the story of Wicca. But I just, when I'm praying and my like connection to
Yeah,
God, I call source or the divine. And like you said, I 100%, it is the masculine and the feminine, the light and the shadow. It is everything that,
yeah,
we have examples of here on this earth. So 100% agree. And just, I guess a better way to say it would be the way that I talk to and connect with is like that mother goddess aspect.
yeah. I get that.
But absolutely, we're meant to be a balance of the masculine and feminine energies, balance of feeling and doing, like you said, that fire energy.
Yeah, which I love.
Yes.
Yes, this is a great opening discussion. Like this is like setting the stage for like everything. So I think I know I don't know if you I feel like you did talk about this, but as far as like the state of the current inequalities of American spirituality, that was a topic, but I feel like we talked about that
Yeah,
briefly,
I did kind of sneak that in there,
which
just
is
that it's
perfect. I
the
just wanted to make
inequality of
sure.
discussing.
I just wanted to
Yeah,
make sure I
absolutely.
didn't miss anything because we have so many points that we want to talk about and discuss, and so I want to
Yeah.
make sure that we all like we get to hear them all because I want to hear them all.
Yes,
Okay,
but no, I that was it. It was just the current state of it's getting better, but many Christians have that holier than thou, that judgment of not being tolerant or even wanting to hear about other religions. And I guess one point I didn't specifically say outright was just not just being not wanting to hear about it, but a little bit of the intolerance that turns into, at least online, not always in person, kind of going into personal attacks towards people that are pagan or spiritualists or however they identify,
right.
and just accusing them of that, that's evil and that's this. So that would be the only thing I would add, is that it's really unfortunate when people of any religion conduct themselves as if their religion is the truth, and they will accuse others of being blasphemous, or like Christians love to say, you're going to go to hell, or some Christians.
Yes. Well, you know what? That just I mean that's honestly when you were speaking about that, that made me think of as we're moving into our topic of forced assimilation when it comes to Christianity being forced upon people. I think what you're describing right now is because Christianity started as a forced religion upon many of these pagan groups. The pagan groups have
Absolutely.
now adopted Christianity because yeah, the colonization has that they've adopted Christianity and almost it's like Stockholm syndrome. You become like your abuser, you become like so
Absolutely.
that very much holier than now this religion is the best, this is why we're here to save you from
Hmm.
your tribalness, we're here to save you from all of your paganness, and we're going to bring you into the fold of Christianity because every nothing is better than this. And that's a part of the forced assimilation which now goes into our spiritual enslavement. So
Absolutely. So you kind of summarized it, but the whole timeline is really ironic, and like you said, Stockholm syndrome, because America started as colonists wanting to leave Britain
yeah.
and the religious suppression they faced in England.
Yeah.
and not being able to practice their religion the way they wanted to. And then you get into the colonies being established, and we get into the witch trial times, Salem witch trials, and
Mm,
where they're literally killing women and sometimes men, accusing them of being witches and devil worshippers, when the reality was most of those women were just maybe not even identified as pagans or realize that they're connecting with their ancestral ways, but these were women that were not afraid to not have a man and acknowledged the power of herbs and nature and knew, they're like medicine women. And so, like you said, Stockholm syndrome, it's very ironic that it began with
mm,
people being colonists, traveling across the ocean to leave religious
right.
persecution, only to then turn around and later on persecute others. And it
Become,
just
yeah,
continued from there. Yeah, and it becomes the the quid pro quo, the state of just
correct.
how things are, that you're allowed as a Christian to be loud and be evangelical about it, but then also to criticize other religions.
Mm,
When to me, that's just, I'm sure you agree, that's just so disrespectful to criticize something that's so sacred, to, no matter what someone's beliefs are. Um,
yeah, I agree.
and it, and further into American history, when we have various waves of Christianity and the forced assimilation, the forced became about being the right kind of Christian and not,
Right.
going against Catholicism, for example, people coming from Ireland, and
Mm,
just the Orthodox versus Protestant. And that's when that all
mm,
began. And you'd have immigrants facing discrimination based on they're not the right kind of Caucasian person, but then also now they're not the right kind of Christian, being called godless, heathens, things like that. And it's, again, not to be so repetitive, it was just perfect the way you said Stockholm syndrome. And for them to become, for their
yes.
ancestors to become what their forefathers, the colonists, were running from, and they just become a different version of a religious persecutor.
Yeah, they just become, and I think that's, I mean, this is really, really good because it's you all of our ancestors coming from non-Christianity being connected to God in such a divine way, being connected to the earth in such a divine way, community in such a divine way that they were forced to assimilate into something that was the complete, like, sometimes the opposite, but something that was more rigid and more structured. Forced it was forced on them without their will, without their consent. And they had to, like we said, assimilation is survival, and religion being a huge factor in assimilation was what they faced. I mean, even just in, yeah, we talk about slavery, we talk about, the Bible being used as a weapon, the scripture, slaves, obey your masters. Um, the Bible being seen as, okay, if I participate in this religion, I participate in this Christianity, I now get to learn how to read. I can now connect with this God that obviously is very powerful, because these people are coming and forcing themselves on us with these guns and these weapons and these huge technological forces that we don't even
Wow.
know about. So maybe I need to connect with your God, because obviously your God is about power, and you seem to be bigger and more powerful than me in this regard. So maybe I do need to subscribe to that in order to assimilate, in order to survive. So then you can see how Christianity wasn't just this spiritual concept. It was literally power. It was literally access. It was literally survival. When I think about it in, the concepts of colonization, coming over here. And then when I think of just the slave trade, when I think about how Christianity in the Bible was used in that entire process, I mean, one of the first slave ships was called Jesus. So, like, all of these things were these symbols of that were a part of Christianity were also used in highly destructive ways. But I also think they were used in very specific strategic power ways, because you had these colonizers that were using the Bible almost as instruction to gain and build upon their power, and then utilize other people to gain and build off of their power. So then you can kind of see, like,
Wow.
the repercussions of that when you are taken from your native land and stripped of that, or you were already here, like the native Indians who are already here, being stripped of everything, being put into boxes, being snatched away from what you know and put into something that is way more powerful than you. You can see that it's way more powerful than you. You're thinking, well, this is I know I know our gods that we've been doing for generations, but this God over here, that they're subscribing to, is beating us, right? Is
You know,
destroying us
that's
in some
an
way.
incredible point. I've never heard that point before
Me
like that.
neither.
That's an incredible point though, and it's it's man, it is literally the spiritual enslavement though, because that
Literally.
perception of the Christian God being more powerful than their native gods or the pagan gods back in with European colonization. It's
Right.
all an
It's an
illusion of power,
illusion
like
of
you said,
power. Yeah.
that I am more powerful because I follow the Christian God, and going back to like some Christians being so uppity and on their high horse, they are subscribed to the illusion, spiritually enslaved by that illusion that they are better, more powerful than other people who do not subscribe to the Christian God. And
Yeah.
that's a really thought provoking, especially from what you brought up, the point of view of slaves here in America and being beat down with that fear and illusion
Right.
until they're so desperate for a way out that in a way they a little Stockholm syndrome themselves, like I need to connect with this God that seems more powerful to find a way out of this enslavement. And
Right.
whoo,
Right. I mean,
that's
it's
powerful.
dude, it's this is like I'm saying, this is God be giving downloads, okay? God gives downloads. When God gives downloads, I just gotta say what the download was. But I think
Yeah.
when you say spiritual enslavement, I often think about how we are all spiritual beings, and from our roots of our tribal roots, our ancestral roots, our ancestral heritage, it's all dipped in spirituality. It's all dipped, like everything from, I mean, like you were saying about nature, and just think of like vegetation and fruits, and just planting crops and seeds and stuff like that. All of that was a spiritual experience. All of there was I mean, when I think of Indian tribes, and I think of doing the rain dance so that it'll rain and they can get, all of that was deeply spiritual experiences that our ancestors were doing to connect with God, to receive everything that they needed to receive, right? So, already being a deeply spiritual people, enter this force that is like, we've got guns and our God's bigger than yours,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, I guess so, because our God has not
Yeah.
introduced us to something like this. Like it reminds me of freaking Garden of Eden, and Eve is tempted by the serpent, and the serpent comes out of freaking nowhere.
Oh, okay.
Comes out of
Yeah.
nowhere, and they're like, "What is this? Who is this person that was not here before? Who is literally challenging our definition of God?" And we're subscribing to it because we don't know anything else. So it's like, so then if we fast forward, and we talk about colonization. We talk about these people riding in on literal horses and having guns instead of bows and arrows and swords and things like that, saying that we come from God and we're Christian and here's the Bible, a higher or a better source, and you're saying this to people who are already spiritually inclined, then you're
Mhm.
literally down, you're holding them against their will, you're literally spiritually enslaving them to say this is the
Yeah.
better way, and we're going to force this, and we're going to show you why this is the better
Mhm.
way, because we're not going to give you a choice to choose anything else. So then that
Right.
happens over generations and generations, and you forget your paganism, you forget your tradition, you forget all of that, because now you subscribe to the better way. So
Right. That's powerful, and you just sparked a thought that's never occurred to me before. But looking at modern day Native Americans and how, even though they were forced onto reservations, there's still um, they still had the ability to maintain their connection with their spirituality and their spiritual practices. And looking at that versus the experience of American slaves, you said something that sparked it. I can't remember exactly how you worded it. Being like removed, I think is how you said, from everything you know.
right.
And I think it brought the thought of American slaves being literally ripped from their homelands in Africa and being
Right.
so completely, like, not just spiritually, but geographically removed
Mm,
from the nature that they are familiar with, the places they are familiar with connecting with God and singing and celebrating and praying to
mm,
God, versus Native Americans, even though they were forced from their sacred places specifically onto these reservations. I feel like, the stories we hear in history books of the Americans that persecuted and killed and genocide against Native Americans being called like the white devils. And I feel like they were able to stay connected and, like you said, already being spiritual, and then this new thought of still being connected to um, the lands that they're familiar with, that they were be able to like see through the illusion that those colonizers were projecting and trying to say, we're better than you, we're more powerful, you're going to do what we say or you're going to die. Well, they chose to fight, and and unfortunately didn't win in the end, but still they didn't surrender their spiritual beliefs, because I think for the African slaves, they were at a disadvantage of being removed from all of their connections, and therefore was like they were fighting that battle of the illusions, the spiritual enslavement, with like one arm tied behind their back. And, it couldn't find a way to connect with this new, completely foreign land, and instead just tried to turn to basically use the white devil's power against them, because that's all the options they had before them. They were removed from all of their sacred African trees and roots and things that they're familiar with for connecting. But I feel like, would love to hear someone's opinion who's actually Native American, but I just had the thought that they were able to see through the illusions and stick to their spiritual beliefs despite the genocide and persecution, because they were still here and they were so connected in the first place. Did I ramble too much, or was that cohesive?
no, I think no, that was that was very cohesive, because I'm as you were talking
Okay.
about like the native Indians being and Americans being able to hold on to their traditions. It did remind me that there are because I know you're going to talk about like holidays and things, so I'm kind of like jumping into that because of what you've been saying.
Yeah,
But I think
that's
of
okay.
I think of Kwanzaa. I think of
Right.
as a holiday, as a highly practiced African American holiday, where it's the day right after the 25th, and every day has a different word, like ujuma, and it's every word. One is like joy and peace and community. Like every day is a
Wow.
different focal
I
point.
didn't know that.
And yeah, and the colors are of they're green, black, gold, and red. And they all have different symbolisms and different meanings behind them. And then when we think about another cultural tradition, which is a West African tradition called jumping the broom, because slaves were not allowed to get married, what they would do is put a broom down and literally jump it to signify their marriage as husband and wife. So I think that all of these groups who have experienced religious erasure and have had to assimilate to some point, I think that in different ways they have held on to their culture. They have participated in just like quiet assimilation or maybe public assimilation, but then behind the scenes still holding on to their cultural heritage. And I think I know in the black community, black American community, we can see different things about that. Like we can see that through music, we can see that through jazz, we can see that through the blues and, rock and roll coming from, blues and jazz culture. We can see these historical ancestral ways of connecting that are religious in their foundation, but feel like they're not. Um, but yeah, no, that just kind of sparked that because I know you're going to talk about religion. I mean, holidays and stuff. But yeah, I think when you're a spiritual being and you have roots, ancestral roots that go beyond the realities that you're experiencing currently, I think there will always be something in you that will always tap into that, regardless of where you were stripped away from. Um, because I can real quick I can say that about myself. I've lived in so many different places. I was raised in Houston, Texas, but I've lived in so many different states, so many different cities, been to so many different countries, and have been in spaces that were not me at all, that had nothing to do with me at all. However, I remain rooted because of that spiritual link that I have to God, that spiritual link that I have to my ancestry, and I can always put things together to remind me of that, to stay firmly rooted in who I am. That way, no matter where I go, Ianthe, the Onyx archive, will always be what it is, regardless of what is happening around me. And I think that is just me constantly being
Powerful.
in rebellion against anything that will try to manipulate or change me, even within Christianity, into something that I was never meant to be.
That's incredible, and thank you for sharing that. I wanted to say first, and you sparked another thought, and
Love it.
talking about Kwanzaa and the journey of the way. I'm gonna badly paraphrase how you just said. Your spirit will always go back to where you're meant to be, in a sense, and
Right.
it had me thinking about the perspective and the timeline for American slaves. And like in our last discussion, assimilation for survival, and then the timeline of like once survival is more social survival, not necessarily a survival for your life, then it's like the community being led back to their African roots. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but Kwanzaa hasn't been recognized in America for very long. Like like we just got through with segregation maybe 50 years ago. It was like even more decades after that. Like just going off my
Yeah, I'm
horrible
gonna look it up.
memory, but I feel like awesome. That I feel like that's just the journey. Like once freedom was achieved and then segregation was addressed and healed, then the survival mindset was able to give way to, like you talked about, the flow, and then your point you just made, your spirit, the Black community and their spirits being able to reconnect with where they're meant to be and where they came from, like spiritually.
Yeah, no, completely. And to Kwanzaa, it says Kwanzaa was first celebrated in the United States in 1966.
Wow. See, so
Yeah, it was
that's,
created
I was
by.
kind of right on point.
No, you were. It was created by Maluna Karenjia, an African American civil rights activist and professor.
Wow. That's amazing. We learned something new together. That's beautiful. So, yeah, that was just, you sparked that point of, like, just like with your personal journey, and no matter where you are and what
Yes,
struggles you face, you come back to your center, Ianthe, where your spirit is meant to be, is where it will go. And
that
I
part.
feel like maybe the Black community as a whole, throughout for generations, and maybe, like even a century, if we think about how long, 2 centuries almost, that slavery was being participated in America, like that was the whole journey until we get to the ending of segregation, and finally, oh, let's reconnect, this is where we come from, and that's incredible. Very powerful.
Yeah, no, I'm loving this discussion. I'm loving how it's gone on this journey, and it's gone on a ride of like self exploration, coming
Yeah.
from. I mean, literally, it's like us. We're talking about spiritual enslavement and how we were. I mean, I don't ever feel like we were ever enslaved, but we were almost indoctrinated to become enslaved, and then we were like, I'm just gonna go back to what I know. But thank you.
Yeah. No thanks, not for me. And
Like
I
I
feel
feel like
like
that's what happened. We're like,
that point, yes. And to lead into the next topic, I feel like it connects perfectly, the point that we came to together of the Black community reconnecting with the African traditions and spirituality. I remember you telling me about West African cosmology,
yeah.
and I feel like that ties in perfectly to that rediscovery of African spirituality.
Yes. So I first learned about West African cosmology in undergrad at the University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC, class of 2014. If you know, you know.
Shout out.
Big shout out, UIC, if you would like to sponsor our channel. You can go ahead and do so. If you would like to book us for a lecture, you
Yeah.
can also go ahead and do that. We are expensive, so have at least $5,000 ready to go. So I
Love
learned
it.
it. Listen, I'm always gonna put the money out there. Um, I learned about West African cosmology in my intro to African American studies class. I cannot remember my professor's name, but he was a really cool African American professor, and he was just like Chicago, and I just remember he was like dark skinned man, and I don't know, he was just giving jazzy. Like I feel like he was just giving
Love.
like black and African, and just very much like I'm an academic. I can talk about this forever. Like it was just a vibe. I was just like, I love that. He's like, what's up, Angela Davis and jazz music, and let's have a drink. And I was like, I love this. What is this?
Beautiful.
Um,
Beautiful.
he was giving like, I'm highly intelligent and I listen to jazz music and my apartment's very aesthetic. Like he was just giving everything. I loved it. Um, but yeah, I learned about West African cosmology there because we were arguing. Well, the argument was that Christianity was the first of its kind in Africa, and that it was kind of like the first to show like Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, this Trinity, this three power source of God. And so then he introduced to us, well, there's this thing called West African cosmology that also has that same structure of the high God. the ancestors, and then you have like the humans, the spiritual realm. But it's
Wow.
all rooted in spirituality. So it's rooted in the interconnectedness of human and spirit. So like they're not separate. So it's like your soul and your humanness are not two different things. They're connected to each other. Um, and
Wow, I love
so
that.
that was so interesting to hear because I had never heard that before. And that was my first, I think that was my first introduction to religion in a way that was mirroring Christianity. Like it kind of was like if I had my foundation here in Christianity, West African cosmology just was like, okay, this is also here. And I was like, interesting. Because it was like it wasn't too far where it was like here's Christianity, here's atheism, and I wasn't like, okay, I don't see it. Like, I'm like, I need to be connected to some
Yeah.
God. Like, that's a part of me too. So it was just interesting to learn about African history, learn about um, uh, Black history, and then have them be put together through a cultural lens that
Wow.
if you were raised in America as a Black American, you could say, oh, okay, I can see how West African cosmology, how maybe Christianity was not the first roots that Black people subscribed themselves to. And then not only was it not the first roots of spirituality that Black people subscribed themselves to, but it was also one that was not this picture of Africans worshiping the sun or Africans worshiping the grass and the ground, and how
Yes.
they try to make it seem like it's this lower religion. You guys are worshiping bugs and deities
Yeah.
and things like that. Whereas West African cosmology was like, no, we have rules here. And it's way more intelligent than you all are trying to put on us and say that it's lesser than when it's really not that much different from Christianity at all. So it was just an interesting
Wow.
introduction into something that was not trying to trivialize African religions as something that was tribal or less than. It was like, no, we're on the same page then with y'all. And actually, we've been doing this way before you decided to call it Christianity and bring it to America.
Mhm.
So so
Right.
that
Wow, that's
was
powerful.
really, yeah, it was very powerful. I remember being like, wow, I never heard of West African cosmology before this. And so it just gave me something else to learn about and subscribe to with my own Black heritage and my own history outside of America as well as inside of America and being an African. And then I could just learn, I have the spiritual aspect, the intellectual aspect, and that interconnectedness between spirit and human. And then spirit and God, like God was never removed. Like there was always like God. And then there was a recognition of ancestors, how ancestors play a role in that, which in Christianity, there's really not ancestors. Like, I guess the closest thing would be Catholicism if you're, Mary, Joseph, Peter, Saint, all of those. I guess the saints would be the closest
The
thing to
saints.
ancestors. But in Black,
Mhm.
African tradition, your ancestors would literally be those who were alive and came before you. I mean, it's literally the Lion King. Like that's
Yes.
African spirituality. It's literally the Lion King. And how they, Simba spoke to his father after his father passed. He was able, Rafiki allowed him. Rafiki literally was the voodoo doctor, the witch doctor who was able to show Simba how he could get touch with his spiritual side so that he could get in touch with his
Yes.
ancestral lineage, which was his father. So it's like West
I never thought
African.
of that.
Me neither. This is God just throwing it back at me because The Lion King. Fun fact used to be my favorite movie when I was 3 years old. I watched that movie religiously.
Oh,
I loved that movie to the ground. Um,
that's so cute. Me
but I
too. My
know,
mom
right?
says it was the first movie she ever took me to as a baby.
Yeah, that's what my mom said too. And then we bought it, and she just said that's the only one. That's the only movie you wanted to watch
Oh,
over and over again. And now that I'm older, I'm like, because it was deep. I was a child, but I was like, that's deep. but
yeah.
I, but yeah, it's like, it, all of that. like recognizing ancestors, which is something in the black church that is very much like, ooh, that's demonic. You can't connect with dead people. But it's like
Mm,
it's not that though. It's recognizing that all the people that have come before us, that we're, if you believe in the spiritual realm, you have to also believe that that spirit and that energy of that person is not gone, it's not dead, especially if we're still recognizing them and recollecting on what they did, and we're using what they did to carry on the baton and complete the mission for them. Then it's just like, okay, you're up, you're up, you're up, put me in the game, coach, you're up,
yeah.
and it just continues to go on. So yeah, that's West African cosmology sprinkled with the Black Church and all of the above.
I really loved um, when you shared about the human spirit not being, or your humanism and not being separate from your spirit, your soul.
Right.
And I just love it. It seems like similar to Islamic Sufism or Christian mysticism, where there's this acknowledgement of, a source God and ancestors, and then your connection to that as a human with your humanity,
Right.
your spirit, and that, like you said, tribal religions are always looked down on as lower or less than, but the reality is it is the most human connection with
Mm-hmm.
God, is being accepting of and our connection with the nature of the world.
Yeah.
And that's just, whenever you spark that thought of like, put that judgment on, it is, in my opinion, the most divine, is accepting that, like, to be alive, be disgusting, and to be disgusting is beautiful, and to be one with God.
No,
That might be
exactly.
a crazy way to say it, but right?
But I agree with that. I totally agree with that because you can't. I mean, it's part of the human. It's part of the human experience, and I think that's. I feel like that's
Yeah.
God is not separate from that human experience, because if God was, we wouldn't be breathing, because none of us can create oxygen apart from oxygen. Like, like, even if you're like, oh, like I was thinking about this the
Yes.
other day, and people are like, oh, well, I mean, yes, oxygen you have to use, it's, what is it? It's not H2O, that's water. It's H and O, right? I can't remember.
Yeah, H.
Hydrogen and oxygen, like two,
It's O2.
O2, right?
O2 is pure
O2.
oxygen, but yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
even in that, even if we said, okay, well, we can get the molecules and we can do that. How do you make the molecules?
Mhm. Yeah.
You know?
That's fabulous, and that's another like point slash belief of mine is, being spiritual doesn't mean you're not accepting of science or of a scientific mind, because in my opinion they are one and the same. Like, science is an exploration of goddess's
Yeah,
creation,
it
and
is. It's literally
you
just
can't,
exploring
anything
it.
that a scientist has. Yes, and like the point you just made, anything that is made in a laboratory by a scientist is made because of the tools given to us by creator.
Given to you to be able to explore that thing. But still, even if you were like,
Yes.
oh, we know that these molecules, we know how to make molecules, but then there's molecules behind those molecules. So you still had to use
Hmm.
something that you did not create to make something else. Bottom
Exactly.
line.
That's crazy. Period.
Bottom line.
Yes.
Period.
I think that's a big part of the separation, though, is just like, I don't know. I had a point and then I can't form it into a cohesive sentence, but it's kind of a part of the spiritual enslavement and the spiritual into one. And in a sideways way, my point earlier about Christians being so vehemently against people who practice personal magic. And my point of like, but God created those crystals I'm using. God created those herbs, you know. Goddess is the one who gave me the spirit of creation, the
True.
power of creation.
True. Yeah, you're not separate. God's not separate
It's
from
just
it, and
wow.
you're not separate from God.
No,
Like, yeah.
exactly.
I love this.
And I love this. It's so cool learning about the West African cosmology and like it's interesting to me that in my little journey in college of studying, I'm sad that I missed out on discovering that and learning about it. But
You still got
it's
time.
really cool to be connecting with you. And exactly, you sparked the curiosity, and I already love the things, like I said, the thing you said about everything, but especially your humanism is not separate from your spirit. Like that just
Yeah. It go
love, and
it's
that
all so connected, I swear. It's all so connected.
it's really cool too that you were able to connect with that part of your ancestry and your African
Right.
heritage, and it it sparks my experience with getting deeper into my pagan practices and trying to connect with specifically my German ancestry and German paganism.
Mm.
And just like I've shared with you briefly, but to dive into like my next point, that spiritually erasure and that especially being
Yeah.
projected from colonizers. And when I was diving into looking for knowledge about Germanic paganism, I very
Mm.
quickly ran into like looking at specific goddesses and gods and trying to look at specific practices for certain, you know, the solstices and the equinoxes and how did they connect with. And um, I can't remember the goddess specifically. I
Mm.
wish I could, but I won't get hung up on it. But just finding the same phrase over and over, that there's very little known historically. There's very little historical fact and evidence and da da da. And so it led me down this like, you know, research rabbit hole
Mm.
to where it didn't take very long to come across articles literally discussing that Germanic paganism and other northern paganism, but that one specifically, when they were colonized by the Romans and then way later on European colonization, through both of those periods, there was this, from the colonizing part, there was this mission of literally destroying their religious areas, their religious texts, you know, like it's all very out in nature, and you have this stone that's been carved with the runes and their rites and their rituals, and it was literally destroyed. And so
Wow.
historians have to kind of fill in the gaps, and it's best guess work, and the closest that you can get to connecting with that destroyed history is Norse paganism, which
Mm.
you know, like fortunately more of it survived, but for German paganism it was literally like so much of it destroyed. And I know there's probably other European cultures or cultures period around the world that experience the same thing. Like I know in the Middle East there's been a really horrible history of these buildings that are ancient, have been around for so long, being destroyed. So it was
Mm.
very disheartening, and got me fired up with like, well, you know, literally having a part of
Mm.
your heritage was destroyed, and historians, all they can do is give their best guess. So that's,
Mm.
for me, I transformed that into just my, what's the word, like adding and strengthening my belief and my tuning into my intuition. And that
Mm.
when I go to
Yeah.
practice personal magic, it's very intuitive. It's very like, you know, I know what colors represent crystals and herbs and such. But if I feel drawn to say something, do something, use a different tool, I just go with it because I don't have texts and history to lean on. So that to me
Mm,
is you speaking about ancestors and the story of like the Lion King and everything. I feel like I believe that that is my ancestors connecting with me and speaking to me through my higher self and my intuition, like
mm.
leading me in the right way to just add to my personal magic and my spiritual practices.
I love that.
Sorry.
No, I love that because I'm like looking down
Thank you.
our outlines and everything we're talking about, and it's funny because our in our last point, it's all about like breaking free from spiritual enslavement. And
Oh, yeah. I
y-
kind of crossed into that point.
no, you didn't, honestly, because I've been like, as I've been going, and this is like, I guess, a sidebar for all of our viewers, but I've been going down the thing and just saying like, okay, how are we going with talking about things? And I don't know if you've known, but we've literally already been talking about all of our points. Like literally,
Say that
like
again, talking about.
we've literally been talking through all of our points without going through each one and talking about them.
Yeah, I did kind of catch that, and
We've
just
literally
there
already
was
been
maybe
going.
specific ones. Yeah.
No, because but that's what I'm saying. That's why it's so funny,
Maybe.
because we literally have gone down it, and so now when you
Yeah.
just started talking about, yeah, and this is what I'm doing to reconnect, I was like, that's amazing, because literally I was gonna be like, so how are you connecting? How does one
Yeah.
escape, spiritual enslavement? And you're like literally already talking about it. So continue, but I
We
just think
just
it's
flow so well.
no, literally, because I think it's just like interesting how we've come through this one. I don't know. Okay, but
No,
continue.
I love it. It just, to me, it's a perfect. And no, I love that you noticed that and said it. And to me, it's a perfect demonstration of like we're very passionate about this discussion, and you and I flow and connect and converse and discuss so beautifully. So,
No, it's such a good
um,
flow. It's really a good flow, because
yeah,
like, yeah, because I mean, just like we've been talking like this whole time about like, the beginnings and spiritual enslavement and things like that, but then we've been like showing like how we've personally been moving out of it, and like you more so right now,
yeah,
more specifically, and how you've been able to reconnect with your ancestral lineage, especially without having the historical background to be able to do so. You've just trusted that it's in there, and I'm going to be guided because I want to explore how do I become guided by something that is not Christianity, like something that's not forcing itself on me, something that's naturally in alignment with me wanting to explore what's actually me.
wow. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to
that's
say it.
awesome. No, I think
Thank
that's so
you.
good.
To get to connect with, continue on to that connection you just made, like there is a big part of my reconnection with my ancestral spirituality has been learning about the Christian monopoly on holidays, especially in America. And we kind of touched on that. Like you said, we've hit kind of all
Yeah.
the points already, but specifically the pagan spiritual appropriation and how almost every Christian holiday that America celebrates, and I know it's not just America, there's Christians everywhere, but it is all appropriated pagan holidays, all of them, to the point
Mm,
of like, I won't ramble. I'll keep it brief because I know we're crossing the hour and a half mark. But starting with Christmas, I think it's kind of common knowledge now with the internet that the historical figure known as Christ, recognized as
mm,
Christ, was not even born in December.
right.
So the actual origins are with Yule and that pagan celebration of winter and the winter solstice, and acknowledging like this is the time of rest and being grateful for the year you had, for being grateful for what you have in a time for our ancestors that was very lean. And in Europe, they're hunkered down and literally surviving the winter and being grateful for what they were able to harvest and achieve, and for having each other, the connection with family. But like to summarize, like for Christmas, the tree and the decorating of that was a pagan celebration for Yule. I
Mm,
mean, literally the Yule log. They didn't even change the name for that, you know.
interesting. Yeah.
And so for the colonization of European, like, pagans and those different tribal people, Christmas was adopted to like aid in their forced assimilation, and like
Mm,
make the colonized peoples more willing to assimilate, because, well, you can still have your tradition, we're just going to Christian it up, we're going to repurpose it and such and such.
yeah.
If that makes sense. And
Yeah.
then continuing on to like Easter, I see a lot of Christians, is so funny, specifically discussing like, what does Jesus's rebirth have to do with the Easter bunny and eggs and candy? And the answer is another appropriated pagan holiday known
Mm,
as Ostara, and that's the origins of the word for Easter, because its other name is Estara. I always like, instead of the O, it's an E, and it's a more
okay.
specific pronunciation. And then specifically, the symbol of the rabbit and the egg comes from that pagan goddess whose name was Ostara, and came across. She's like the goddess of spring and fertility and rebirth, those kinds of things.
Mm,
And the legend goes that she came across a rabbit that was dying, and a bird that was dying, and in order to save its life, she had to transform it. So she transformed it into a hare, but to
mm,
honor its life as a bird, the hare had the ability to lay eggs like a bird, and so then the hare, as a sign of thanks, would lay these
mm.
colorful eggs around the forest during her season of spring, as like a celebration and a thank you for what she did. And so
Interesting.
that's where the symbol of the Easter bunny and the colorful eggs come from, is that legend. And again, colonizers needing to change these traditions and make them Christian, and that. So that's that on
Interesting.
that. That's the that on that.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those connections. So people
My
can
soul
have
left my
like,
body.
oh no.
I'm
Keep your
sorry.
soul in your body. We need you to be connected right now, especially for this
I got it.
conversation.
She's tethered
But
and we're connected, but
she's
that bump
tethered.
was just like,
That's funny. But yeah, no, thank you for like
yeah.
the sharing of the paganism and then the Christianity, the little making it
Hmm.
palatable, and then saying these are Christian now.
Yeah, there's a couple more. I'll be
Oh
more
yeah, go
brief with
ahead.
these,
Go
but like
ahead.
St. Patrick's Day, it was interesting. I actually learned that the whole legend and everything about St. Patrick being the one that drove the Druids out of Ireland is a myth and is folklore. That he was actually enslaved by the real person, historical figure, was enslaved by the Romans, was an English person, and eventually had achieved his freedom and became a Christian minister in Ireland. But he was not like fighting the Druids, driving them out, such and such. But the Christian church, and specifically the Catholic Church, because Ireland, obviously being in Europe, they built up St. Patrick as an actual saint and kind of fed into and created this narrative about him being Ireland's savior from the pagan Druid priests. And it's
Mm,
all just he was a slave that he was enslaved by the Romans, forced to work and live out his slavery in Ireland, and he eventually returned there of his own volition. And he was Christian and he did minister, but he wasn't fighting anybody, and It's certainly,
Interesting.
that's a little more nuanced, but just again helping the English with their colonization, them needing help to colonize the Irish. They lifted up this basically fake person to let the Irish people have someone to, like, going back to what you said in the beginning, the Stockholm syndrome, and accepting the forced Christian assimilation and having this Irish figure to, like, be grateful for their being saved by, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
Right? It's pretty crazy. And then, of course, getting back onto the pagan holidays. Of course, we all know about Halloween, and it's traditionally called Samhain for the
Mm.
pagan holiday. And whenever that was still the time when Christians were iffy about celebrating it, and now it's just widely accepted
Hmm.
and has become about candy. But again, that's connecting with the turning of the seasons,
Right.
and specifically, like, connection with the and next, moving into, like, Thanksgiving. I know that most people in America, especially in the younger generations, have thrown away Thanksgiving because we understand it was a complete lie, what we were fed to as kids. Like, oh, we sat
Hmm.
down with the Native Americans and had a cute little dinner. No, no, no,
Right.
no. But it is more than just a lie about that and colonists and their relationship with Native Americans. It was another replacement of a pagan holiday called Mabon, which actually takes place in September, the end of September, but it is the pagan harvest festival, the pagan holiday of giving thanks, and that's for the fall equinox. And that's like leading into that's when you start leading into the theme of being thankful as you get ready for winter. You just began harvesting and being grateful for what you're harvesting and sitting around and giving thanks. So um, connecting with that instead of Thanksgiving is something that I'm becoming more passionate about and has really
Hmm.
helped with my breaking free of that spiritual enslavement, like we talked about.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's, I'll leave it there because I know I've been info dumping a whole lot. So thank you for letting me spill all of that. But it's really interesting when you start digging into the origins of these, and you very quickly see that none of them are original Christian holidays. Most of them don't even make sense with what Christianity is celebrating at that time, and the
Hmm.
root of it all is colonization and cultural appropriation to speed along
Mm.
the forced spiritual assimilation. And, and like I
Interesting.
said, part of my reconnection with my ancestors has been acknowledging that and not celebrating and posting online like Mary Yule and saying that to people instead of continuing the facade like I actually celebrate these things.
Got you. Got you. And that, I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense that you're pulling away and going, you're pulling yourself outside of spiritual enslavement would have to do with you unearthing the real pagan holidays that reconnect you back to your ancestral lineage so that you're able to go deeper into that, instead of, like you said, going deeper into a facade. You're breaking that facade, you're decolonizing uh, Christianity because now it's like not even that anymore. It's
Yes,
paganism for you.
absolutely.
Okay, okay, we love that. Let me see how I've been breaking free for myself, and just how I think anybody watching, if you're trying to figure out how you can break out yourself, and if you've been part of Christianity. I can speak from just being a part of being a Black Christian. Mine was just realizing that God isn't everything, and I kind of touched on this earlier, but that God is, realizing and recognizing God in ways that are outside of your traditional structure of God. So being out in nature, recognizing God in just an idea. that you may have, recognizing God and just the small, minute things. There's this awesome book called The Art of Noticing, and it really just makes you start noticing things around you. And I think
Wow.
the more you start seeking God, the more you will find God, because God says in the Word in the Bible, it says, "First seek ye the kingdom of God and all His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." So if you're looking for God, you're going to find. It says, "Seek and
Wow.
you will find." So if you start to look, you will indeed find God. So I think my form of breaking away has always been a curiosity of where am I going to find God next. And so because of that, I think I've been able to
I love
break
that.
free thank you. And I've been able to find God in the most monotonous things. Like I said earlier, the wind and just breathing in the fresh air was a way that I found God. And I feel like I really find God a lot through conversation. I find God through talking to God, because God has given me the ability to be a good communicator and to express myself via my words and my voice. So I have found that I like to speak to God out loud, because as I'm speaking to God out loud, God is literally talking back to me. And as you saw earlier, how I was, just kind of being like, oh, this and this and this and this. I really feel like that was just me channeling God, and God was like, well, here's a connection.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, there's a connection. So I've learned just through communication that that is how I've been able to exit being enslaved, because I realize that God is vast, and if I want to experience God, I want to be vast too, and I want my mind to be vast and my spirit to be vast. So I think looking at things like, I love listening to tarot, and I think tarot definitely has its place. I think it can be an opening to you exploring God in a new way. And of course, if it's uncomfortable for you, if that's not where you want to go, I think you should honor your spirit in that and allow God to lead you to a path that feels right for you. But yeah, that's how I've just kind of left it. And I think a lot of black Christians who were previously raised in the church, I think that's how they have also decided to go out on their own, because they're realizing that ancestors and having an altar and things like that are not completely polar opposite to what's already been happening in Christianity. I think they're just starting to see that, we anoint ourselves with oil in Christianity. So does the spiritual community. We have an altar that we take communion. So does the spiritual community. So we're starting to see all of these parallels that are not as scary, because they're there, they exist, and we're starting to see God outside of just tradition. So
I
that's my
love that.
soapbox. That's my soapbox. But yeah,
Hey,
but
we deserve our soapboxes. We're passionate about this topic.
no, and it's really good, and I'm really happy about how it's been flowing thus far too. And I do have to still be mindful of time, because it is 7:57
Right.
on
I
my
see we're
end.
coming up on right.
Yes, we're
Need to
coming
wrap
up
up
on.
in about 10 minutes.
Yes, for sure. So I was thinking that we can
Okay.
just we have our closing questions. So I was thinking we can just pose those, and then we'll say our final remarks, and then yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The I have one little tiny I wanted to add on. I promise to not ramble.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just I love your point about tarot being another way to connect with God, and yes, to honoring your spirit. I just wanted to add my little thoughts on that because I used to work in a place that sold tarot cards and books about spiritualism and crystals, all the things. So I got the question a lot, especially from people that were Christian, about if it was evil, if it was talking to the devil. And
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, what I would advise them was like, you speak to it is for me when I use tarot, I'm connecting with my higher self. So it's kind of like the most spiritually aligned version of myself that is she's speaking to me, she's giving me advice, was always the way that I posed it.
Mm-hmm.
And that I would say, like, it's advice, it's a tool. And as far as who you're connecting with, you connect with who you set your intention to connect with. So
Intention.
if people want to connect, you can connect with the God of your
Yes, I love that. Thank you for
that
putting that.
was it. I kept it as brief as
No, that
possible.
was
Thank
good.
you.
That was good.
Absolutely. Didn't mean to
No, I was
interrupt
just
you.
saying that was a really good like disclaimer to add on to like yeah, tarot and then back to do nothing without intention.
Yeah, that's that part. So, going into the closing questions, like you just so beautifully said, my questions for our community would be kind of multi part. So, the first part being, is Christianity stunting the spiritual growth of America by keeping us from looking for answers within ourselves, like we discussed
Mm,
here today, or exploring the many aspects of the soul, which we also discussed today? So, that would be question part one. And then to add on to that, thinking about people in your life, viewer, do you know someone whose religion, whatever it may be, it is a crutch to them and is, like we talked about in the beginning, a spiritual enslavement instead of how it should be, which is, or what it's meant to be, the stepping stone and the connections? Do you know someone in your life like that?
love that. Love that. And we'll also all these questions will also be in the description, so don't worry about like, writing them down yourself. And so then my question would be for Black Christians, African Americans who have been raised in Christianity all of their lives. Is there any part of you that feels like you want to that Christianity in that way is keeping you back? Is there any part of you that feels like you know there's something else or you want to kind of grow out of it? Is there any part of you that is curious about growing in a different way that has that little inkling? So I would love to know that down in the comments too. And if there is a part of you that does want to grow and connect with that, what does that look like? Does it look like, connecting with your African heritage? Does that look like, if you're from a different Caribbean island, like what does that look like if you are curious about growing outside of Christianity? What does that look like? And where is your curiosity leading you right now in this moment?
Beautiful,
Cool.
beautifully said.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so that's all for our discussion. I appreciate, I'm glad we had the discussion. I appreciate everybody that is listening to our
And it's
discussion as well.
We will wrap it up though because you gotta sleep early, early
I got an
rise, and
early
busy
sleep.
day tomorrow. Yes, so she needs her beauty sleep. So that concludes today's live discussion. It's been another amazing one, like you said. The flow was there. We hit all the points
Very
just
good.
in
Yeah,
flow, and just
we did.
only a couple stops to make a couple specific points. So it was just really an incredible experience. Thank
Yes.
you all who will be watching this later on when it's uploaded. I'm so grateful to you, Ianthe, for having me here at the Onyx
Gracias.
Archive.
Gracias.
To our viewers, I hope this discussion has challenged your ideas, expanded your perspective, and deepened your understanding of the world. Because remember, knowledge is power. Also, if you're interested in a place where intellect meets creativity, please check out my other YouTube channel, Alexandria the Artisan, where I explore travel, lifestyle, and the art of creative living. And you will find links to my other future projects on that page as well. Thank you again, Ianthe. This has been amazing, and I cannot wait for next week's episode.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that you have been a part of this. I mean, we've both been rocking from the beginning. We're only on episode 2.
Yeah.
but but
But when the passion is there,
but yes, the passion is there. Everything we've been doing has been there. The conversations have been there, and we're excited to continue to bring more of these discussions to you all. And yeah, so I'm Ianthe. I'm the host of the Onyx archives, and I just want to leave you all with this little tagline that I will be using constantly. So remember to walk with power, speak with purpose, move with intention, and until next time, stand in your truth.
Wow. Mhm.
Mic drop now. But
Yes,
yeah,
I was about to say that's why I was silent after the wow because I was like, that needs to sit. That needs its own
let it
moment.
marinate. Let it marinate. And if you have any, let's continue this discussion down in the comments. Say everything you need to say, all your opinions. Keep it very respectful, but share how you feel about things. And until next time, stand in your truth.
Amen.
Amen.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to both of our channels.
Yes.
I
Yes.
have
All
been
of it.
Alex the Academic.
Yes. And I'm Ianthe, and we're signing off.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.